Let me make a quick introduction. You know already some of the panelists. That's Michael Richardson, Michael Ackerman, Elliot Lear. They have all talked. So let me spend more time in people, the other panelists who have not spoken. First, we have Bhaskar Medhi, who is from Zero Labs, which is a startup on security. So we would also, once you introduce yourself, do try to tell us more about your work. We also have Tirumaleshwar, who is a long-term participant at ITF. He's an architect at McAfee, and he has 17 RFCs. He's been in DOTS, DNS, privacy, WebRTC, Stern. The list is very long. So, and then we have Nalini, of course, who will be moderating this panel.
Thanks, Dhruv. Okay, let me give everybody a minute to make their way up there. And
oops, the other way around. You have to keep this. That needs to be passed around.
Yeah, we need some.
Just put it up.
We need one more mic.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having Zero Labs here. My name is Bhaskar Medhi. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Zero Labs, and probably the least technical person in this room. I spoiled my life doing an MBA, but hopefully I'll be able to contribute a little bit to this conversation. Look forward to a good discussion with you all. And about Zero Labs, we'll talk a little more, but essentially our position is cryptographic techniques are going to be very, very important for privacy of the future, right? So how do you build some of these techniques that are more scalable, that can complement regulation, not rely on regulation alone? And we'll talk a little more about that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Thiru. I'm a senior software architect at McAfee. I work in the Innovation Center at McAfee. At McAfee, we are primarily, I'm looking into secure home gateway, primarily to protect home networks and IoT devices within home networks. Prior to that, McAfee had worked in Cisco for around 12 years, where I had started working at ITF. In the last few years, I've submitted various drafts, and many of them have become RFCs, primarily focused on security and privacy. One of the recent drafts that we had, which is DNS over TLS, as many of you may know, has become an RFC, and I contributed to both the DNS over DTLS and authentication profiles for DNS over TLS. I'm also primarily driving some of the work with regarding to WebRTC privacy, which is Turn-based. Many of you may know Turn is going to provide IP address privacy for endpoints trying to use WebRTC for VoIP communication. And some of the other security work that I'm primarily driving at ITF is DDoS open threat signaling, and I'm also contributing to CoAP working group.
My name is Michael, and I'm a troublemaker.
And all Michaels are troublemakers. I'm just going to say I'm Mike Ackerman. Most of you have met me already. I want to start by saying thanks to everybody that put this event on. This is my first time at this type of event and my first time in India, and this has been just fantastic. You all are doing a wonderful job. I don't even know everybody to thank, but thank you for having us. And I'm just going to say yes, round of applause for everyone. And I just want to say my sort of role in some of these organizations is to try to get enterprises, of which I'm a representative, more involved in national standards influences. We're not very good at that. We're not very prevalent. And now I don't know where to turn. I'm sneaking up on myself. This is scary. This is scarier than the 10-year thing that Lee just said. So anyway, so if there's any more people like me, or you know people at enterprises, we need more influence. We need more involvement there. So please contact me, Nalini, who runs an organization that's expressly for that called EDCO. And I think these are all wonderful causes, and I thank everybody that's involved.
Okay, so guys, if you have questions for these guys in the whole area of privacy and security, please feel free to line up, and I'm going to go ahead and prime them with some questions. Okay, so this is I don't want to make this like a two-page question, but There are multiple platforms that we've been talking about. We've been talking about, I don't know if platforms is quite the right word, but multiple environments. Let's say IoT is one, the mobile world, desktops, laptops. What are your thoughts on privacy and security for each? What do you think about that? And whoever wants to start can, yeah, Michael, you want to start it?
All right, so I'll talk about IoT. So privacy is kind of very an interesting problem in IoT because typically there's a lot of sensors and maybe there's actuators that are doing things and are collecting data, and they may be sending it out to the internet or they may be sending it elsewhere. So you can talk about the privacy of the data itself. And that's kind of an easy thing. And in this case, that the incentives for the privacy and the security are aligned if you encrypt the data. That's really cool. Where the incentives kind of become disaligned is things, for instance, a device that goes and wishes to get new firmware and therefore may have to reveal to the internet, possibly only by the IP address that it goes to get the firmware from, what it is. So when your Wi-Fi controlled vibrator wants to upgrade its firmware, you have just revealed that you own a Wi-Fi controlled vibrator. You have just given away a fairly private piece of information, and you did so in the hope that your device will not be ownable by someone else on the internet. So you have a disincentive now. Your incentive essentially is to keep it off the Wi-Fi always, okay, and not do it. I had an interesting discussion in some forum somewhere with someone about a couple weeks ago about why they felt their Roomba vacuum cleaner should never upgrade its firmware because it means going on the Wi-Fi, and they couldn't be guaranteed it wasn't going to upload a map of their house, which apparently they do. And I said, well, the problem is that your problem is if you want your Roomba to be updated, you're going to have to get it on the network. And if you didn't want to reveal this other stuff, maybe you should have bought a different vacuum cleaner, one without a controller in it. But the problem is that at some point, there's going to be controllers in everything, and you have the question of what do I want to do? And which direction do I want to go? Do I want a secure device, or do I want to admit that I own the device?
Sure. I think those are great points there. So you'll see, like, whenever Zero Labs kind of participates in some of this discussion, we do tend to pull it to our area of strength, which is cryptography and stuff like that, right? And I've been thinking about, like, why is this privacy such a paradox? And Indian roads have a lot of potholes, and I think privacy is like a pothole. You know, you go over it, and then comes an expletive in your local language, but that's the end of it, right? You don't really go out on your street and kind of bring the city hall down and things like that. But if there were a very major, big landslide or something in the road, you would. So this fear of the spectacular, which is very rare, can really take the discussion of privacy towards that end, whereas the small things that trouble us each day, like the gentleman here mentioned about owning private, intimate hardware, right? So these things are really complex, and the question originally was in the case of IoT. So if you talk about some cryptographic techniques, I mean, IoT devices obviously have a very low footprint about memory and capabilities and things like that. So I'm sure there'll be more innovation and more research done along those lines. I think NIST recently called for research on lightweight cryptography specifically for IoT. So I think cryptography will continue to become more important, very specific to the environment where they'll be deployed.
For the past 1 year, we've been trying to profile various IoT devices in the home networks, and what we found out was pretty interesting that what we saw is most of the IoT devices that we had seen in home networks were using encryption, which was a good thing, and they're giving security. Though they may not be using the right cipher suits, I've seen many of them using TLS 1.0, SSL v3. I'm not going to name those devices here. But the surprising thing was none of these IoT devices had been designed with privacy in mind. I can tell you that by just looking at the traffic patterns, we observed IoT device traffic for a few days, and I can pretty much tell what's happening with that device, whether the user was sleeping, was he awake, whether he was asking a question to Alexa. So those kind of information could be just analyzed by, if there's an attacker sitting in the internet and monitoring the traffic pattern, like the interpacket arrival rates or packet lengths, he could pretty much tell the device type and what's happening with that device. So I don't think these devices have started building with security in mind, but they have not been designed with privacy in mind.
I think I told Nalini when I agreed to this panel that I would answer no questions, but that I would instead ask them. And so I'm going to. How many people in this room, let's talk threats for a moment. How many people in this room believe that are more concerned about cybersecurity and the threat of being broken into, or having either having your data revealed or otherwise being harmed by maybe having your money stolen? How many people are worried about that? Okay. How many people are worried about government intrusion based on either maybe a court order or some other reason to gain access to the data that's on your system? Okay, consider about half the number of people, by the way, just to give you an idea. Okay, so how many people believe that the IoT vendors are in a position to actually fix either of those problems? Okay, good. Right, one hand. Okay, so if it's not going to, so if it's not the IoT person, okay, now let's ask the next question. How many people believe that your local CPE provider, like or your local router provider, like a Linksys or a D-Link, yeah, like the one that's in your house, how many people believe that those devices are in a position to help?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in a position to help. Okay, good. How many people believe that it's the responsibility of the service provider to help you in this regard? Your ISP? Yeah. Okay. So I said I would give no answers. I just wanted to reveal that people have some points of view on this, and I don't know that there's a right answer to that question. I think seems to be like there's a role for each of those players.
And for that matter, right, I mean, I don't know if many of you know, CPEs are providing security. They have intelligent IoT firewalls. I'm not just talking about McAfee, right? I can talk about n number of competitors that McAfee has, Dojo, Cujo, Trend Micro. There are a dozen other companies who are shipping small Pebble kind of appliances within the home network, or they're upgrading the CPE with their security software so that they can provide home network security. But I have not seen anybody giving privacy, at least privacy protection for the home devices at least.
And just to add a little more flavor to the conversation, right? So we all talk about privacy and lots of hands here, but the minute you get 45 minutes of free Wi-Fi at the airport, you're willing to give your number as well. So it's a bit of a paradox. I think we'll talk a little bit about compliance and fines. That's when this thing gets teeth, right?
I just wanted to point out that, at least in my conversations, I found that a lot of people equate encryption with privacy. But I think I wanted to kind of elaborate on the point which Thiru made. One is metadata. That's kind of important. Second is side channel attacks. A great example that happened in the recent past was Strava. So Strava is this app, for those who don't know, basically is like health tracker, and then it kind of reveals where are all the places, which is the place that you are running, and on an anonymized basis on a map they plotted where are all people running. Anonymized data, but it revealed very interesting stuff. It revealed where did US have its military bases. Yes, now that's a problem, right? So metadata again, anonymized. Excellent other example was, I think that was AOL published a data set of all the searches I think in the US, I think it was one state. There's nothing to tie them together. Everything had an anonymous ID. There was no IP address or nothing. But based on the search of one person, he searched for things like serial killer, murdering my wife, bomb letters. And he also interestingly searched for a certain, I think, candy in a store nearby. And using this triangulation, they were, what happened was a SWAT team actually landed up at his door. And turned out that guy was a writer for a television series on crime. And he was basically researching for his TV show. This is a real story. It was there, I think, on the slate. So yeah, I mean, just wanted to kind of point out that it's not just about encryption, but there's a lot more to privacy, especially side channel and metadata.
Let me, that is great. Now, 1 second, Lee, because one of the questions that I had was about what Tim Cook just said in this whole area. He just gave a speech about exactly what Vinayak said. Yeah, but did anybody on the panel want to talk about any of this, or maybe? I just wanted to say one thing. Yeah.
I'm going to bring in a slightly different perspective. Working in healthcare, privacy and security is sort of #1 priority to us. So it's a necessity. It's part of what we live and breathe. But I'm a network manager, and that same solution, which is frequently encryption, not always, this is a very complex issue, but using that as an example, inhibits me from managing, monitoring, and diagnosing my network. So what I'm looking for, and one of the reasons I participate in some of the standards bodies, is that I would like to see the products, solutions, protocols, and future standards have more of a balance. Right now it's tipped way on the side of privacy, and not much thought is given to operational reality. So that's kind of unique maybe for me, but that's my perspective.
One of my first actual presentations in an IETF meeting was actually on this topic, 1996. Okay, and it's interesting because everyone said I was an idiot, insane. Why would I ever want to build such a complicated system? And I said, because auditing. And that just didn't go, right? Just missed everyone. I said, well, that's what firewalls do. They didn't do NAT at the time, because, well, why would you, we have lots of address space, why would you NAT? That was bizarre, right? And that's what we did, is auditing and access control. It was a yes, no, and when we say yes, write it down. And the fact that it revealed secret bases, just as several articles says, actually spoke more to the educational levels of the average GI, understanding of what's going on. And so that actually, we should say, wait a minute, the US Army is not even teaching their people enough to get what's going on that and what they're doing. Wow, that's a real eye-opener as to what we're doing and who we're dealing with. It's one thing if my grandmother doesn't get it. I think it's another thing if a GI doesn't get it.
I think Michael brought up a very fair point, right? Which is the degradation of usability of data when you use legacy encryption like AES and others. And I thought it was opportune to make a point here about some new techniques that are coming up, which is where Zero Labs is also working. It's not an ad for Zero Labs, but I would encourage you guys to look about encryption techniques like homomorphic encryption, for example, whose promise is to be able to work on encrypted data without decrypting it first, right? So get the insights, but don't give don't give the underlying data itself. And obviously, if you talk about encryption, performance, and other things matter a lot. So I'm not trying to say that this new form of encryption is going to save the world, but there are new techniques emerging because the need for data to be analyzed is so much more important today than 30 years back when locking away everything in the name of security was a viable option. But it's that same data that today runs your businesses, so you just can't lock it away in the name of security. So there are some interesting new encryption techniques coming up. Yeah.
Great. Lee?
Lee Howard. So, Michael, I'm glad you brought up that example because I was actually standing to ask about, I've heard it said, security, privacy, pick one. In a perfectly secure network, you don't have privacy. So, well, I guess if you have perfect privacy, you can't get security because you can't find out what was being done privately. Great. I have cryptographically, I have encrypted traffic that I'm using to hack you. Great. Now find it. Come find me. You can't tell where it came from. If I have perfect privacy, you don't know who I am. You can't come protect yourself against me. So you can't see what I'm doing. You can't find me. So there's a trade-off to be made there. And since the panel is called the tension between security and privacy, I thought I would ask for sort of more about what that tension is and how we decide. Engineering is about trade-offs. So how do we decide how to make these trade-offs?
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty right that if you see most of the malwares that at least I have analyzed are moving towards encryption, right? I have seen very less malwares or botnets which are using clear text. Though I've seen some malwares which are using still DES, but the whole idea is they want to encrypt the traffic, and which gives us a good behavioral analysis that they are not the browsers and there are some bad applications that are running on your endpoint devices, right? I think what IDF is doing with regard to privacy is the right thing, I believe, but if firewalls have to do anything with encrypted traffic, right? I mean, it has to be a non-transparent way of, right? I mean, it has to be a consented way that you act as a proxy, right? Earlier firewalls used to do whatever they wanted to do with the traffic without even the end user knowing that, hey, a firewall is inspecting your traffic. It's even modifying your payload, and the end user would never even know that. But with even TLS 1.3, especially talking about TLS proxies, where the end user basically gives a consent that he is ready to use the middle box as a proxy, it's not possible to act as a proxy without the user's consent. And that's really a way, I think, going forward that I make a choice whether I want security or not. And if I don't want security, I just pretty much let any malware come in and hack my system. But if you believe that your enterprise security or your home security is going to solve your problems, and many of the companies have to be GDPR compliant now, at least McAfee is moving towards GDPR compliance. I'm pretty sure many of the security vendors and even enterprises are moving towards GDPR. So the laws are far more stringent that we cannot use the data for our own personal benefit, right? I mean, the lawsuits are pretty high that we are supposed to pay, I think, 20 million or 10% of your revenue. That's what the EU regulation claims, right? So I think nowadays, I think security vendors are far more stringent with regard to how the data is going to be stored, how it's going to be stored at rest, how the PII data is going to be anonymized for running your ML models. So I think security vendors are becoming more and more aware that they can't take the privacy of the user for granted, and they have to be really compliant because of these regulations, right?
I'll keep it very brief, but see, your question was very direct, right? Which is the tension between privacy and security. And that question completely alludes to encryption and encryption alone, because that's where the tension is. And I think it will never get solved for the one simple reason, which is it's someone telling that it's good for me, but it's not good for you. And that's how it's going to be forever, right? The guys, because it yields itself so much to rhetoric, right? So encryption is good for example, national security, but you guys should not have it for consumer use. So as long as there is some third party who decides what is good for one party and not the other, I think the tension will always be there. And like we have that tension at home, between a husband and a wife or something. I don't know.
To sort of have a different perspective, there's an article in yesterday's. Yes. Well, no. Hang on a second. I haven't gotten.
He hasn't. Yeah.
I haven't gotten to an answer yet. Wait for it. It's not my answer. In yesterday's New York Times, there was an article about Google being forced to reveal all the information about people who were within a region at a particular time, actually several particular times. That was because somebody was getting robbed at gunpoint in that region repeatedly. And the government said, here's a court order. Give us the names, everything you know about the people who were in this location at these times. So, the question. Everybody in for more questions? should Google have to answer that court order? Is that what safeguards should be on that court order? Isn't there privacy is not just a technical problem, right? So that's my question. Look, it was a question. The microphone is not entirely free, but hopefully other people have some answers as to what they think about that as an example of balance of privacy. But Adrian, before you go, I did want to ask you, could you kindly reveal your national insurance number for us? Oh, just kidding.
No, I could, but I won't. But would you like me to? Oh, that was an answer.
But the bigger bug is, why does revealing that number cost you anything? The bug in the system is that number in itself somehow provides services, just like in the U.S. and the Social Security number somehow is used as a password rather than as a username, right? And it's the same thing. Like, well, why is this a problem? Okay, so we have something that's being used. We have something that we've been told to keep private because it's a security token, when it never should have ever been a security token. It's simply a username, right? We've made a serious mistake in systematic, mother's maiden name kind of way. But I have an answer to a segue from his question to what I was going to say before even. Okay, at the IETF we've had this big kind of, I don't know what I'm going to call it. At one point I called it a fetish, and people didn't like that. About doing, making sure that everyone stops using EUI-derived addresses in Slack. Okay, and so we have a whole bunch of things, and it's been, in the IoT space, we repeatedly say, guys, this is not talking about people most of the time. It's talking about devices that don't move. These are not devices that go to Starbucks from Starbucks to Starbucks, okay? And if they do, it's part of a bigger system that probably a person that is going from Starbucks to Starbucks. And so this technology that we had that was EUI 64 based or EUI 48 based is perfectly adequate for a whole bunch of stuff. And ultimately, randomizing your MAC addresses was a much better solution for the Starbucks to Starbucks problem anyway than making sure you had a unique, untraceable v6 address, in my opinion. I have devices on my network at home that keep coming up with privacy-enhanced addresses, and the first 64 bits never change. They're always got the same 64 bits. They're completely traceable, always traceable. So I've lost a bunch of security because I can't track over time what these devices are doing, like your IoT firewall. So I've actually lost some peace of mind, and I've gained nothing in the way of privacy on this, okay? And so I actually think that we've kind of thought we've misplaced this, and I think a lot of it comes from Starbucks. We have literally a generation of people that have never been on the internet, right? They never had a public IPv4 address, ever. They were at Starbucks. They thought they were anonymous because they never had a public IP address. Some of us who are a little bit older have, had desktop workstations that had addressable, you could telnet to them in 1991. And we had never any illusion that the web server logs were somehow anonymous. You went to a web server because you were tailing your own web server logs running on your desktop in 1993 or 4 or something. And every time you got a new entry, you're like, oh, who's that? And you type it into who is or whatever. And you're like, oh, someone else has found my website, right? So we had no illusions that coming to a web server was private. And there's a generation that's 20 years younger than me that they didn't grow up that way. And they have this delusion that your layer 3 addresses are somehow private. And if they had only known in the first 6 months of using the internet that wasn't true, well, the 6 or 7 onion routing companies that have been VC funded would still all be running because people would have plocked down $20 a month for their privacy system, right? And that would be different. The world would be different now because we would have so much anonymized Tor traffic that you just use it all the time because you'd want to hide the things you really care about. You want to hide in the other stuff, and we just don't have that. It's not being used. It's too expensive somehow.
I'm going to go back and try to answer Lee's question from my perspective in my limited little world. What I do for a living is I manage and monitor networks and try to fix problems. Frequently, when there's a really tough problem, especially if it's on an encrypted link, I need to decrypt that traffic. It's something that needs to be authorized. It's not something we do lightly, but in those situations, I'm able to get an authorized RSA key, decrypt that data, and fix the problem. If that goes away, I'm unable to fix the problem for my user, and I think that that's going to be bad for the user whose privacy we're protecting, and for me trying to do my job. Being from Detroit, where we make all the cars, I always boil things down to a car metaphor. Today, I give my keys to the mechanic so he can fix my car. If I take that away from him, he can't fix my car very well anymore. Maybe he can fix the tires, but he can't get into the car, can't get into the engine. So it's kind of like boiling us down to using metadata only. So that's my concern, and that's sort of my direct answer to Lee's question.
And how many car theft rings started from mechanics who duplicated the keys? None in Detroit, because But that was the risk. That was the risk of leaving your key, right? And we have what, Valet Keys that don't open the trunk or something, right?
Which is actually the essence of this issue, is that there are pros and cons there are risks and gains, and somebody makes that decision up here whether or not you should give the key or not. In my situation,
but even in the automotive situation, automotive companies realized there was an issue and had a valet key, which didn't let you open the glove compartment or the trunk, is what I believe, but did let them drive the car, right? And so we did something. We actually did something, and that's what you're asking for. You're asking for valet keys.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. Right. That's right. Yes, Mike, you are.
You want a valet key.
Yeah.
I would have to know more about what that implementation is.
I don't know what it means yet, but it's a.
I'm an operational guy. You're not getting nothing by me.
It means it means that after you do the fixing, we give you a tip. It's only maybe $1 or $2, but we give you a tip.
I like the concept.
I just, since we are talking about automobiles, I talked about the locking, unlocking system. So you'd find my perspective interesting. So I talked about an example where you could unlock the car using the key, using your phone. So we have this program where people can subscribe to a car, and then they get 2 sets of keys, rather 2 keys. One key just opens the door, and one key actually does the ignition. And one of the reasons was cost, but the other reason was that if I give the key to somebody, even they may just be able to open the door, just do one function well, but maybe not do the other function, which is do the ignition. So even in a car, there are ways of actually bifurcating certain functions. And to take this analogy to a network system, you can have some kind of voucher or token-based system which is very, very time limited, and you could do. That can also be done. So you might have the key, but there is some kind of mechanism which is time limited tied to the key that allows you to look at this traffic. That can be a possible solution.
Hang on a second. I just want to ask this question. Do people look? It's another question. Do people believe we should solve privacy in terms of the what's on the wire, in terms of our protocols, or do they believe we should solve for privacy what's on the disk, in terms of what's stored, or at some other point? How do we solve this tension? Should it be solved on the wire? Because if we're solving it on the wire, that means changing the protocols to do what? Weaken the perfect forward secrecy, for instance? Or if it's on the disk, then maybe does that voucher mechanism work that you're discussing? I'm just asking.
And yes, sorry, go ahead.
No,
No, you're,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I haven't, but I have been waiting. So I wanted to ramble a little bit about whose privacy are we talking about? Because I don't think we've really been talking about end users properly. I want to ramble a little bit about where the money comes from, and domains of privacy. So, when you leave your house, you typically lock your door. That's you, as the end user, opting in to security. However, we've got some really cunning devices, which in the UK are called Yale locks, and they're sprung locks, so that when you shut the door locks. But they've got a little tab on them that you can disable that. You can opt out, so it's secure by default and you can opt out. When you rent a hotel room, they're all secure by default. If you rented a hotel room and the door didn't actually lock, you'd be straight down to the front desk saying, "Get me another room. I'm not leaving my stuff in an unlockable room." So we have in our heads as end users this concept of basically of secure by default, opt out. And if the lock manufacturer had a business model whereby your door could be locked, etc., but the lock manufacturer could go into your house, check in your refrigerator, and sell the data about what was in your refrigerator, you would want to know that that was part of the deal when you got the lock. So with privacy, and I think the IETF made a major mistake with GeoPriv. With privacy, location information is basically it's on by default. And the classic here was that people were taking photos of their kids coming out of school, posting them on Facebook, which is a knowing act of sharing information. What they didn't realize was that the photo had in its metadata the location and the timestamp. Now everybody knew where their kid was at a particular time of day. Wherever they were in the world, they could say, "Oh, that's a cute kid. I've left at home as a latchkey kid, Elliot." And you know, now people can target because that information is on by default. And most users are not as aware of the issue of privacy as they are of security, because everybody's grown up with a physical lock. They've got that kind of idea. So then that comes to the money. People make money out of whatever they can do. Okay, they see opportunities, they grab it. It's not a fault of anybody that when they see data that's available in bulk on the internet, they use it and they monetize it. However, and this is a societal thing, we have to give the power back to the people whose data it is to choose whether or not somebody can make money out of that. And that then takes me to the domains of privacy. If I come into your enterprise network, it is your enterprise network. Everything I do in there is yours. It's like if somebody comes into my house when I'm there and they have a cup of tea. Hey, I know they had a cup of tea, and that's my information as well. But if they go into a high street store and have a cup of tea, that's not my information. So we have to understand all of those mixed things. And I did have a question when I originally stood up.
I've taken them all.
Yeah, possibly.
Adrian, but I disagree a little bit with your enterprise situation and analogy to cup of tea. Because when I come to your house for a cup of tea, I specifically don't expect you to put arsenic in it.
That's security and privacy.
Fair enough. When I visit his enterprise, I don't expect him to harvest any of my passwords on my computer. Right?
He gave you the password.
No. They're not his passwords or his network. They're my passwords to CNN or something. Right? Well, that's the point. The point is that I had an expectation of privacy, and we did not have an adequate discussion where he said to me, I'm going to have to look at your data as you went by. If he told me that, I would have said, oh, I will keep them safely encrypted on my disk.
Right, and that's
Okay.
the assumption of the domain ownership.
Yes, exactly.
That you're as a user haven't properly grokked. If you're in my house and you take out your credit card and you say out loud, hey, my credit card number is, would you be surprised that I now know your credit card number?
And Amazon too.
Well, yeah, yes, that's right. So when you're in his enterprise and you use your password in a way that he can see it, is the problem that he shouldn't be looking, or is the problem that you shouldn't be doing that in his house?
Agreed. I agree with you completely. And to further, there's another subtlety here too, right? I come to your house, we say, let's order a pizza, and I pull up my credit card. I don't read the number out loud, but I say, I'll pay for it, right? And, well, it doesn't mean I'm going to necessarily show it to you or whatever, but it does mean I may want to use it at that point, right? So we have to have that back and forth where you say, you know, I get to observe that you didn't put arsenic in my tea, and you agree that you're not going to watch my session while I pay for the pizza, which you're going to eat, right? And we don't have an automatic way of doing that, and that's what we really need, so that I'm aware before I reveal anything who I'm revealing it to and why.
Yeah, let me.
Clock's gone to zero.
It is. No, I actually have a protocol to do exactly that. But on that note, but guys, Vinayak, you have one last question because we're out of time.
So I just wanted to share an anecdote that happened with relation to this conference, and we talked about credit cards. So we expect that one part of the reason why secure by default is important is because users are not educated enough many times. And sometimes as engineers, maybe it might feel like a paternalistic decision, but have better knowledge than them to kind of protect them. A good example is when we were trying to book rooms for Lee in this hotel. All of us were CC'd on that. And the hostess of this hotel, she said, Lee, I need your credit card number and CVV so I can block on the card. And we're trying to make her understand this is not what this normal protocol, and she was failing to understand because it seemed that most people were comfortable doing that. And we were telling, no, this is not, even if you do it on private, still it's not okay. I mean, it's not just that people are CC'd, that's why it's uncomfortable, but that can be misused. And we see this like in the real world, which is why I think everyone has been harping on the fact that secure by default is important.
And you couldn't send her an encrypted email. And even if you had, she would have encrypted it and kept it on a computer unencrypted. Yes.
Yeah, so the email wasn't encrypted as well, yeah.
All right, guys, this has been an incredible conference, and I want to thank the sponsors, Cisco, Juniper, and ISOC. Let's give them all a really big hand, because without them, without them, we wouldn't have been able to have this conference. And
Have Drew take a bow too.
oh my God, yeah, yes. Yes. Yes.
A lot of people, a lot of reminders.
Yes. No, he was incredible. And thank you again to all the volunteers and all the speakers. You guys really, again, I mean, without you guys, we'd be looking at each other, and it'd be totally, it'd be totally private and totally secure. Yes. So I look forward to seeing you guys next year. And we really want to, this has been so energizing and exciting. There's going to be probably something, whether it's a webcast or, a live event or something on a pretty regular basis. And we'd love to have people really, really involved. Please get in touch with us if you want to work together. I've already had a lot of people come up and say they want to be involved, which is just wonderful. So on that note, thank you all, and see you really soon. it should be